Hi, I'm Nicole, and this is Nick's Picks. I've been posting a video every month this year talking about the books that I picked out to read that month. So today we're going to be talking about the 5/7 books that I read in July. I say that because the last three books were kind of all little novellas that were part of one series, but we'll talk about that when I get there. I did read a little bit more than I usually read this month, mostly because I'm off in the summer. I'm a school secretary, so I have July and August off. So I could stay up really, really late. I mean, I do that anyway, but it's just I could stay up guilt-free really, really late reading, even just spending days at the park with my daughter, going on trips and bringing books to the pool. Like, it's summer. It's really good for reading in the summer. So that's why I read a little bit more. So basically, the first book, which I had kind of alluded to in my last video, was something that I stepped out of my comfort zone for. Not much, is off limits to me in terms of fiction or movies or TV. Like, it's, I understand it's fiction and it's fine. I love horror movies. I'm into, I'm fine with that. Like, graphic stuff and, violence and language and sex and all that kind of stuff. Like this, I'm fine with all of it. But there are, and I mentioned this in another video, like three, I guess, topics that really do give me pause, especially with watching them visually. It's not something I could really wrap my head around usually or get past at all to even enjoy like the story or whatever else is going on. So I usually steer clear. So those things are usually rape, child violence, and gang violence, child crimes of any sort, really, and gang violence. I just can't help, again, not that I've even had personal experience, but I can't help thinking about it, thinking about my daughter in certain scenarios, and it just doesn't get out of my head. So I usually kind of avoid that stuff. However, this book that I'm going to talk about, all over Book Talk, BookTube, so many positive reviews. Everyone loves it. I really believed it would be a really great payoff if I gave it a shot. It is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. And let me tell you, this was one of the best books I've ever read. Like, I cannot talk enough about this book. I loved this so much. Not only as a book, as a romance. It's one of the best romances I've ever read, one of the best male main characters that I have fallen in love with. I loved everything about this book. Now, going in, you do know the premise of this book is that Dean and Cora are kind of like, it's an enemies to lovers type thing. So they're, enemies. They dislike each other. And right in the beginning, right away, they kind of get kidnapped by a serial killer. And the whole book is you don't really know what's going to happen. Are they going to make it out? They're not going to make it out. Just dealing with this together. They dislike each other, but they have to kind of come together to try to survive this. And I'm not going to really say much more about this story because I like all the directions that it goes in and I don't want to spoil anything. But I will say, obviously, this guy kidnaps them and you can assume that there's going to be some, things in the realm of torture and or rape, and there certainly is. And it is certainly hard to read and think about. And so there were some very haunting scenes. So in terms of recommending this to other people, if you're really against that stuff, if you can't, deal with that for any reason, you probably don't want to read this book. But if you're someone like me to where things like that do give you pause, but maybe you would give it a shot, I was able to read it and still fully enjoy this for what it was. It was very real in the sense of even though it was fiction, they really took you through, they made you think, what would happen if I was in this situation? What would the repercussions be? How can I ever get past it? How could I do anything? And how would I try to survive? Anything. A lot of mental health stuff. And again, I don't want to say too much without giving away any of the story, but just even the ends, at certain parts at the end, I didn't really love. I was thinking how something played out or whatever, but then I was thinking, but if this were real, that probably is how it would go, and I'm good with it. And ultimately, I did like how everything wrapped up and all of that stuff. So it was good. My literal only criticism for this book, which by the way is 110% a 5-star read in my opinion, but I could still give you a little criticism. Just the one thing that I would say is it's kind of presented as they hate each other, and then they're put in this dire situation together. And how do you do that with someone that you dislike? You kind of know early on, without spoiling anything, I'm going to say that this hate that they have, maybe there's some feelings underneath there. So this is not necessarily two people that like hate each other and then all of a sudden have to come together. This is more like basically Dean is Cora's soon-to-be brother-in-law. So he's dating her sister and has been for a very long time. They're supposed to get married. And they just kind of always pull pranks with each other. They've just kind of always been like at each other's throats kind of thing. Like they don't have the great relationship. And I feel like, especially on his end of things, you kind of do get the impression that maybe this is a pulling the pigtails type situation where there might be feelings underneath, and maybe even for her. That's what I'm saying. So kind of going into it, it's more like this life or death situation they're in is kind of forcing them to maybe deal with things that were feelings or whatever that were already there. I don't think that really spoils anything. I think you kind of get that vibe, very early on. So my only tiny thing is it might have been just slightly more interesting to see two people that really do actually dislike each other for whatever reason have to try to bond and get through this together. So that would be my only thing, because I kind of thought that's what it was going in. But once I got in there, I realized this is more of like a love-hate type relationship, and maybe this is just going to kind of help them face things that they were never able to face before kind of thing, which is what it was. So that would be my only little thing. But other than that, this was so amazing. The way that he is there for her, and just even through these haunting, terrible situations, is you can't help but just be so touched and fall in love with this fake man. It was great. I don't even have much more to say about it other than this was a wonderful book. And again, just in terms of recommending it, I totally would, but there are some haunting scenes, some things that might stick with you that you might think about, as do the characters after they happen. You gotta, it's very real in that sense. This is not some lighthearted, they don't like each other, now here's the wrong. No, they were put in a life or death situation. You don't know if they're going to even make it out of this situation. You don't know what's going to happen to one or both of them. And I don't want to say more than that in terms of the story. So this was great. I even read, because I always read everything cover to cover. There was a little excerpt from another book by the same author called Lotus, and that even kind of drew me in. The little bit that I read of that actually looked really good, and I think I read after that somewhere, I can't remember the name of the book, but there's another book that brings a character from this book and Lotus kind of together. So that sounds very interesting to me. I wish I had all the time in the world to just blow through all these books, but I really, that's definitely on my radar. That's on my TBR, is to maybe continue with Lotus, and then the book after that ties the stories together. So that sounds fun. 5 stars for sure. The next book, I was feeling brave. Now we're on to child crimes again. So in one of my earlier videos, I forget exactly what month I read it, I did Keep It in the Family by John Mars, which is very much child crimes, and I hated it. And, it was partly because of the content of the, dealing with the kid stuff, but it was also just because I feel like the story wasn't even, good enough to get me past it. The pacing, everything, it was not something I was dying to read. It was not this big anticipated thing that I expected it to be. So this was different. I actually did enjoy this book. So even with the child crime, I definitely was able to still, enjoy this book. And that's what I mean. As much as these things give me pause, I don't like violence or gang, but yet the Saw movies are one of my favorite things. I've said that before. So to me, the story in those movies is so interesting to me and so twisty and turny and fun that I could get past that other stuff. So that's what I mean. It depends. So in this case, this was a very interesting premise, and it really hooked me, that this girl, Darby, she's in college and she's driving home during a snowstorm that she shouldn't even be driving in, but she's trying to get home to see her sick mother. She's very sick, dying. She's got to make it home in time. But of course, the storm is really bad, so she, has to stop at a rest stop. And at this rest stop are 4 other people And, they're all going to be stranded there together, looks like, for the night until these roads could be cleared in the morning or whatever. No signal. Of course, they're like in the mountains, I think, somewhere, and there's just all the snow and no signal and whatever. So on one of her trips outside to walk around and try to find signal, she sees in a car there is a child in an animal crate. So right away, that's haunting me, and I hate it. So much so that let me just go off for a second and say, when I went to get this book in Barnes & Noble a while ago, I found what I like to call, I guess, the dime store version, like it's smaller and fatter, like easier to carry around, something you'd find in like a gas station or a pharmacy version of this book. And the cover, I forget exactly what it was, but it was very much like a child, like an eye or a hand or something against the glass of a van. And I'd have to look at that every time I picked up the book. And I was like, no way. And I knew this was what I was expecting to find when I had, looked up the book. And I went right up to like somebody that worked there. I'm like, is it possible that this could be somewhere else with a different cover? And sure enough, in typical weird, bookstore fashion where things are not always where you think they're going to be and you have to chase them down, we went to a completely different section of the store and found this copy of the book, which does have the handprint, but it's much more doable. So anyway, getting back to the story. That was so interesting to me because now she knows she's trapped with somebody that's kidnapping a child. So we got to figure out who this is. So sounds fun, like like a great setup, so to speak. And can she help the child, like escape? Like this sounds like we're really going to go on this journey here. And what I will say is this. It was fun in the sense of seeing how Darby is going to get out of this and if she can help the kid out of this and all of that stuff. But in terms of like the twists and the turns and all that stuff, nothing's going to blow you away, I don't think. I mean, like I said, she's trapped with 4 people, so it's one of them, so nothing's really going to come out of left field here. Like, you've run through every scenario. The big twist happens very early on, I guess. The big, not twist, surprise, finding out who it is. It was good, but again, not totally as unexpected as it could be. Set up as unexpectedly as it could be, I guess. And then, of course, later on, there's maybe, which again, you probably suspecting maybe there's a little more to it. Again, I don't think I'm spoiling when I say this. Anybody that reads thrillers is thinking this way. Is somebody else involved? Something else going on? We don't know. But you're thinking about that, naturally. So even the other little things that maybe happen after that in terms of a twist, nothing's going to blow you away in that sense, I don't think. But in terms of just the story and seeing how we get from A to B and, how we get out of this was entertaining, fast paced. I kept picking it up. I read it in like 2 nights. I just, wanted to see what was going to happen and how they were going to get out of this. So that's, was pretty much the fun of the journey, not necessarily the twists and the surprises, which again, were set up as well as they could have been, I guess. But, there's not many options here. So you kind of, I don't think anything is super crazy. That being said, I probably would give it maybe like a 3-star. I don't know. When I read thrillers, I do like a, oh my God, and you're not really going to get that from this. I don't think. This is, again, more about just the fun of how we're going to defeat the bad person and all that kind of stuff. So, it was good for that. I will also say, as you can see on the cover, it's a movie on Hulu. Usually I'm excited to go right from a book if there is an adaptation in some way to see the TV show or movie. I haven't done it. I looked at the trailer. It just looked okay. I will say I was very impressed by the trailer because they don't let you know who the bad persons are. You really just see the heroine there kind of like in all these crazy action-y situations, but they really do a good job of leaving out the bad person so that you don't know that going in, like, who that might be. So, maybe I'll watch that. I don't know. But again, it was okay. Good. And it took place, she's listening to Christmas music on the radio and it's cold. So not necessarily a summer read in that sense, but it is in the sense of when you think about just a quick beach read that, you will just enjoy and finish quickly. That would be this. And next, along those lines, we have the new Frida McFadden, The Tenant. I'm going to be honest, I was a little disappointed. And let me tell you this, and I've mentioned this in all my videos, so I'm not going to, wax poetic about Frida, but I love her. I discovered her and like last summer and quickly read a million things. So I've read about a dozen books at this point of hers. And I think that's part of the problem because she is so good. She's so twisty. She's so good with her pacing and everything. And I just feel like once you've read so many of her books and stories, you kind of know how she operates, so to speak. So at this point, I think, my opinion on her books going forward is definitely going to be based on the fact that I'm reading them later on. Like even if it's a book that she wrote earlier, the fact that I've read so much of her stuff already, I feel like the books as I keep going further and further along, are not my favorites because I'm figuring things out just because I know how she operates. So that's basically what I'm going to say about that. I don't know if everybody agrees with that assessment. I find that when I talk about Frida McFadden books, my top 3 are still The Teacher, The Inmate, The Boyfriend. I love them. Of course, The Housemaid. The whole series is good, but the first book really was good. Those are the best ones, and it's mostly because those are the first ones I read. The first 3 books I read were in order were The Teacher, The Housemaid, The Inmate. And so those were like my favorite books. The Boyfriend I did read after a little bit later on and still was totally shocked. That was like, I really didn't see that coming. So I definitely recommend that book. If anybody said, what Frida McFadden book do you recommend? I probably would say The Boyfriend in terms of shock value. But now having read that, like that's what I mean. Like now even that trick, whatever she did there is kind of in my head. So I feel like there's not much she's going to put at me at this point that I'm going to be like as enjoy the twist as much as I did in those first couple, because they really took me by surprise then. Whereas now I'm like, not even consciously, just kind of like looking for it because I know how this goes. That being said, her books are so fast paced that even if you think you know what's going on, and even if you're right, it's still so fun to read. I will say that. It is so fun to read. This is even a longer book of hers. And still, I think it took me 3 days, 3 nights worth of reading this. They're just fun. You want to keep picking them up. You want to know what happens. They are the perfect thrillers, all of the books I've read so far. Except, I will say, and I've mentioned this when I read it in January, my first video, The Coworker. That is the only book that really did not do anything for me. The pacing of it was not even great. So aside from the twist not being like, crazy for me, the book itself, the story did not read as well as the others that I've read. That's just my opinion. There's a lot of like emailing and stuff going on in the book, so the structure is different. And it just didn't click for me. That's the only book that I would say avoid out of what I've read. Other than that, I've loved every single one, even ones that I have figured out ahead of time. Even they're fun. This one in particular, the premise here is that, what was the guy's name? Blake and Krista are together, and he has a really great job and gets fired for something that he claims he didn't do. And so, but all of a sudden he's going from all this money to like nothing. And, he's got this expensive apartment that they live in, and she finally convinces him, we have to do something. Let's take in, which he doesn't really want to do. Let's take in a tenant, to help us pay the bills. So they're kind of forced to have someone come. And a lot of the people that they, interview, whatever you call it, to, see if they're going to move in are like crazy and terrible and ridiculous. And they finally find this normal person, Whitney. And so she moves in, and that's it. But of course, Blake, she's like terrorizing Blake. Like there's all these problems that keep occurring, weird smells and weird noises and all this kind of stuff. And so it's driving him insane. And again, I don't want to say too much more than that. So we don't know what's going on. Again, the big twist, I was not surprised by at all. I was thinking along those lines for sure. She always gives you a little something extra at the end, and she did, which was fine. Also, again, nothing super crazy. If you haven't read any Frida McFadden, this probably will blow your mind. If you have, I do think you're probably going to know where she's going with a lot of it. At least have suspicions. Even if you don't figure it out completely, I think you might know exactly, not exactly, but you might know pretty much where it's going to go and what the situation might be here. Again, just my opinion. I will also say there's just a couple of things in here, especially when we find out what's really going on and all that, that seem a little far-fetched, which again, in a lot of thrillers, that's the case. But in particular in this one, maybe there was a couple of things that were like extremely, exceptionally far-fetched to me, like, but, just to kind of make it work with the story. But whatever, it was fun. It was definitely a fun read. The color of this cover is beautiful. I'm all about that. And yeah, this was just a good, fun, quick summer read. So I would definitely, recommend it. But again, if you're a Frida McFadden fan and you've read a lot of her stuff, you might not be totally blown away, or you might. And I mean, there was a big twist. But just personally, I wasn't like totally shocked by the situation. And now I've almost like dreaded talking about this because it's a book that's been on my TBR since I've been into Book Talk and BookTube this year so much. Let me tell you, every person I've seen that talks about this book, without fail, not only do they like it, it has become their new favorite book of all time. And there is no one that doesn't like this, even people that don't read this genre. So I feel like if you are a book talker or, booktuber, you will know right before I even pick up this book what I'm talking about. And it is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. And like I said, this is probably going to be the most unpopular thing I ever say on any of these videos, and I probably will lose tons of credibility for it, but I have to be honest. I did not enjoy this book. I had such high hopes. I was so excited. Look at the size of this. The fact that I even finished this with the way I was feeling about it. I gave it every fair shake I could give it, and it didn't land for me. So I want to say this because the content here is important. It has value, it's eye-opening, and I could totally appreciate all of that. So this is about World War II, and Kristen Hanna does write a lot of stories about, she writes a lot of historical fiction. She writes a lot about women. So in this particular book, which is the only book I've read of hers, it's about World War II and takes place in France, but like German occupied France. And she gives us the point of view of two sisters. So we're hearing like the woman's side to the war kind of thing. Whereas most times when we read about war, learn about it in school and all that stuff, the men are the ones going off to fight and all of that stuff and putting in these dangerous situations. But we don't often think about what the women were left dealing with for them as well. So it's about two sisters that are not particularly close, and they kind of have different journeys, and so it's not really the same story. I mean, they do, overlap at times, but we're mostly either hearing, and again, I've looked up pronunciation of this woman's name. When I was reading it, I kept in my head hearing Vian, and when I look up the pronunciation, there's like 3 different ones. So I don't know what it is. If it's Vian, if it's Vian, if it's Vian. Like I've seen it all, but in my head it's Vian, and her sister's Isabel. So Isabel is not married. She's young, and she is enraged by the war and looking to sign up and do whatever she could do. So she's kind of off as part of the resistance. It's almost like an Underground Railroad type situation, where she ends up helping these pilots that are bombing, France, and their planes are crashing or whatever. She's helping them get back to America or England or wherever they're from. So, and leading them herself, she had a whole network of people. She's, the Nightingale there, that's her part of the resistance. And Vian is at home, and she is married. So her husband goes off to war, and she has a daughter. So she's kind of keeping her head down and really trying to survive the war. And, like I said, it was very eye-opening. You don't realize, when this was happening, when the Germans were occupying France, they come to your house and it's like, I live here now, and so you read about that stuff happening, you learn about it in school, but now we're kind of seeing the picture of someone that had to live with one of these German soldiers too, actually. And then you see the picture of, the Germans were the ones eating all the food and the wine, and meanwhile the French women that were left behind with their kids have these ration cards, and they're waiting online in town for hours every day to get a scrap of bread. You don't even get much with these ration cards and all that stuff. So having to make different moral decisions and all this kind of stuff. And then when they were targeting the Jewish people in France and, all that kind of stuff, like it got crazy. And, you read it again, you read about this in school, this happens, but it's very different to read a picture of it. And this is not the first thing I've read, by the way. I mean, I in school, in college, I was reading stuff like this about war, and about these terrible times in history. And like I said, as for someone that doesn't like torture and violence, surprisingly enough, something like Night by Elie Wiesel, I read that. I didn't think I had to read it because it was for class, so I had to read it. But I was like dreading it and scared to death because I knew that was not going to sit well with me. I didn't want to read about the Holocaust. And yet I read it and I immediately read it again. I could not believe how well done that book was, how much it touched me. I loved it. I mean, that wasn't fiction, but I mean, same idea. And then I took a class on African American women. So of course I had to read about slavery. There was a book that I read that I absolutely loved and I couldn't believe it. Like, I cannot watch usually anything to do with like slavery like that. I can't, like, I just can't see it. Like, it bothers me. Like, I can't see it. We all know what happened. We all know it existed, but seeing it is very hard. And I feel like that I don't want to watch that stuff, and I don't want to read about that stuff. And yet when I did, and I had to read that book, it was amazing. And so again, it's not like I'm just so anti-history books or whatever, but I'm going to be honest, I was just bored with this book. Like, I felt like it's not even like, well, maybe the content doesn't matter to me or anything like that. It was just very boring to me. I also didn't connect 100% with these characters. Both of them annoyed me to death at multiple points in the book. Like, I was bothered by a lot of things about them. And again, I don't know why. Like, I couldn't wrap my head. Like, it wasn't like I was just like, oh my God, I gotta see what, and, there's a little bit of a love story going on. So like, you kind of want to see that too. But like, I just was not invested enough in it. And I feel like even the pacing and all of that stuff, like, while this subject matter is important, while it was eye-opening, while I could appreciate how well researched and how much work went into this book, it is a good book. This is not my favorite book of all time. This is not something that kept my interest. This is something, I'll be honest, that I was giving myself you have to read 50 pages a day just to get through it. I don't DNF things. It's very rare that I do that. So, I'm 100 pages in, I'm 200 pages in, and I'm still not liking it. And my daughter, who is not like me at all, she hates reading of any kind. She multiple times I would pick up something, I'm like, I don't want to read this. She would take it from me. She's like, Mom, don't read it. You don't have to read this. And I was like, I can't. I want to see what happens. I thought maybe something at the end would be like amazing. Like, so I was looking for what is making people say this is my favorite book of all time. And unfortunately, I didn't find it. Not for me, at least. Again, it was well done. If you like historical fiction, absolutely. It's an interesting perspective. I would not read this again. Like, there are people saying I've read it multiple times. Whoa, not me. I definitely would not do that. It just didn't keep my interest. Even things like I could appreciate so much as a writer myself. Like, I was so impressed by how descriptive she was about things. So for example, like, the woman's making clothes because they have no money, and it's really like it was a hard life, and she paints that picture so well. She talks about how cold it is so well. She talks about how like every day we're hearing about the outfits that she's wearing, and how she made this one from the shower curtain, or made this one from one of her husband's old shirts, or whatever. But there came a point where I was kind of like, okay, I get the picture. And like, it was just a lot of that. Like, we're going on and on about her dress today, or, what's going on. And again, I know that's trying to like just make it hit home. Like, this is the monotony of these people's lives at that time, and the things they had to deal with. But it's like, I get it. And like, nothing was really like happening, so to speak. So, I don't know. It was boring is the word for me. Like, I did not find it interesting enough. It even opens like kind of present day with an older lady kind of looking back on this. So it's one of the sisters. You don't even really know who it is at first. So that's even like got my interest. Like, oh, I wonder who it is. And like, just kind of like seeing all of that, one of them at least survives it, but I don't know. I don't know. It just never hit home, and I kept going and I kept going, and I forced myself to finish it just because of how much people talk about it. I'm like, I need to see every ounce of this book to find out to just search for what people are finding in this. And I just never got to that point, unfortunately. It's, you know, so many other Kristen Hanna books were on my TBR because of the way people are talking about them. And having read this, now I'm kind of like definitely backburnering those. Again, I don't know if it was just this I didn't enjoy or if it's going to be like all of them. I don't know, but I certainly can't invest this much time without, you know, knowing for sure that I'm really going to love something. So, you know, I was disappointed. I was disappointed for sure. And I'm probably going to be the first and only person on any type of social media to say this was not for me. And unfortunately, I wouldn't recommend it unless you're like a historical fiction buff that like loves that stuff. And like I said, you know the books I read from my videos. It's romance, it's thrillers. That's what I pick up for pleasure. But that doesn't mean I can never read something else. Like I was totally intrigued by this. And even when I was in school, I was a reader. I loved, those assignments were never like, you know, like I said, certain subject matter scared me, but in terms of like having to read the classics, To Kill a Mockingbird, also, I loved all of that. Like I that was never a chore for me to have to read. So it's not like I cannot read anything else, but again, this was just not fun. And I didn't even like say like, oh, but I'm glad I read it because I really appreciate, no, not for me. Not for me, I'm sorry. And, you know, I hate to say it because I know how much praise this book gets. And again, it just, I guess, I don't know, it didn't hit home for me. It was a little too boring for me. But again, it does paint a great picture, opens your eyes to a lot of things that maybe you didn't think about when thinking about the wars and stuff, especially from a women's perspective. So, you know, if you like this kind of stuff, read it. If you don't, I'm going to be the first person to tell you this might not be the gold that everyone is saying it is for you because, you know, it didn't hit that hard for me. Next, so last month I mentioned that I love my Kindle because I had gotten a Kindle for my birthday in June. And so, but I'm saying how like I hate that like I have to, you know, I don't know that I could give up physical copies because I like having them and all that kind of stuff. So that the next thing I read was the first thing that I've done solely on the Kindle. I did not have the physical copy. I just started downloading these books on Kindle Unlimited. I've heard a lot about them. I'm going to show you on my iPad though, the covers, because the Kindle doesn't have color. So it's prettier to look at them here. So the next couple of books I read, this is when I'm saying book/books, because this is the books that I read were The Risk, Sidetracked, and Scarlet Angel by St. Abby, or Stabby as some people think she likes to be seen as, you know, whatever. So these are part of the Mindfuck series, which if you heard about that, you've probably seen this cover or this cover. Usually it comes as one gigantic book with all 5 books in it. So it's a 5-book series, but it's a 5-book series, but each book is separate, and you know they're short. They're almost like novellas. But there is like a beginning and end to each book, and on the Kindle they're downloaded completely as separate books. So I read the first 3, and the only reason I haven't read all 5 yet is because I got totally sidetracked by a different book that I saw that I read a little sample of and was so hooked that now I'm like in it. So I just finished the 3rd book that I was on in this, and then I moved on to that. So that's why I didn't even finish this yet. But anyway, so I'm going to first show you these covers again so you can see how like salacious they look, okay? Because that's my first and, you know, one of my only criticisms of this is that it's very misrepresented in terms of the smut factor. I feel like those covers alone and what you hear, this is a dark romance, and the smut factor, I just want to say, anybody that's going to read this, it's really not there. Like it's there. You definitely, you know, you get a little graphic and that's fine. It is spicy. But those covers that I just showed you, you would think that this was like one of those little to no story, total porn books, and it's not. And the story is what is so intriguing, that it's about a serial killer dating the FBI agent that's on the case. So that sounds amazing, and everybody's like, oh, it's like Criminal Minds, and you got to read it, and blah, 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 blah. So I go into this, and my immediate criticism off the bat, and it's the only thing that keeps me from like loving this 100%, is that the writing just seemed very amateur to me. Like like enough that it was glaring, like that I couldn't like stop, like I felt like I was reading someone's homework assignment or a story for a contest or something like that. I feel like it was very unrealistic dialogue, a lot of like verbose dialogue, and just kind of going on forever with things and saying things that normal people wouldn't say in conversation. Just asking somebody to describe someone's house and it's like a, you know, whatever, two-story, like you just don't talk like that. Like it just, certain things like that like were bothering me from the get-go. So that's my biggest criticism for this series, is that it doesn't read well to me at times, and it just seems, it just is very glaring that this is fiction, because you know, I feel like this is just very unnatural. A lot of the dialogue, a lot of whatever. You know, they're profilers, so like, you know, he's got, and I guess that's what they do. And it did remind me of like a Criminal Minds, I guess, but I just feel like, you know, it was just very verbose all the time. Like, and the dialogue just didn't seem natural to me. That aside, the story is intriguing. And I will say I'm a little disappointed, because I thought this was going to be straight up serial killer and agents trying to hunt down the serial killer. And while it is, you know right away she's killing for a reason. So the serial killer is Lana and the agent is Logan. She's killing for a reason. Something terrible happens in her past, and it's like a revenge thing. She's trying to tick all of these men. She's got a list of these men that she's going to kill because of something that happened in her past. Now, talk about out of my comfort zone, and I'm going to be honest, I can't give this a full review, I don't even think, until I finish it, because I haven't even got, we've gotten bits and pieces. I've read 3 books, and we've gotten bits and pieces so far of what has happened to her in the past, and it is gruesome, and it is haunting, and like, you can't even believe, definitely a rape situation. So again, anybody that's triggered by that stuff, I don't know if you would be able to get past it. I am. I'm too curious now. It reads so fast paced, and these books are so short that you just want to keep going and see what's going on. So like, I'm in it, and I'm going to be in it, and I'm going to see what happens, but I'm not quite sure if I regret it yet, because I haven't gotten to the full extent of what happened that she's trying to kind of like avenge here. So I will talk more about this next month for sure, but so far I will say, if you're not triggered by that kind of stuff and you're okay with rape and violence or whatever, or not okay with, able to read it kind of thing, it's a fun read. It's fast paced. The romance is great. Even though the smut factor, I've read books where that was much better to me. Like, I feel like it's still there and it's still fun, and it's, you know, it's spicy, it's fast paced, it's, you know, you like the romance, you like the characters, so you want to like see what's going on. You like all the characters. She's got a friend that's kind of like helping her, so you like him. It's good, and a lot of suspense, a lot of like, she does a very good job of like, you know, dropping. We know right away something happened, and then we just know a little more and a little more, and really, I think at this point, the way she's killing these guys and what happened to her, it's just so graphic and so over the top that I think that's how you can get past it, because it's just so crazy to wrap your head around. But, you know, so that's what I'll say about that. Like, if you're triggered by that stuff, I don't know that I would jump into it, but if you think you could handle it, again, it's an interesting premise with the serial killer and the agents, and we're finding out more and more what's going on from the past. So, you know, that's kind of interesting, and I cannot wait to finish it. So I am excited about it. I want to finish it. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad I just, you know, Kindled it if it was free on the Kindle Unlimited, because the book itself, it is very big, and, you know, again, because of the content, I wasn't sure, and still will not be sure until I'm finished, whether I want that hanging around in my head. So yeah, it's good that all 5 books are available on Kindle Unlimited. So I'll let you know about the rest next month. So the only other book I wanted to mention, I'm not even putting this in my reading total, I revisited Harry Potter. Now, at the time when these were popular and when I was younger, my husband and I both like loved these books. This is one of the best series ever written. Who doesn't love Harry Potter? I've read it multiple times. So my daughter now, who, as I mentioned, is not a reader like me, and has a lot of focusing issues with school and all that stuff. So in doing summer reading, she had to read a fantasy book. And so I'm like, we're finally going to do it. Let's read Harry Potter. Like, I'm forcing her to do this because she has to read a fantasy book anyway. And we decided, you know what? Let's do Audible. and let her listen while she reads along. Maybe that will be a little bit more interesting. Maybe that will keep her focused, especially